Hello, I'm Marcus Railton, and this is the Scots Care podcast. Scots Care is the only charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged Scots in London through a range of support, including mental health therapy, financial grants, advocacy, sheltered housing for older Scots, job coaching, social events, befriending, and support for children and families. The charity's been running for 400 years to help break the cycle of poverty experienced by some Scots in London. In this series of the Scots Care podcast, I'll be chatting to celebrities and supporters of the charity that have forged a life often away from Scotland and about the ups and downs that can bring. On the podcast today is best-selling crime author Alice Clark-Platts. Before Alice turned to writing, she was a human rights lawyer dealing with cases all over the world. As well as this, we chatted about growing up in London with media parents and what attracted her to the law. She spoke about expat life, having lived for over 10 years in Singapore. And most importantly, we talked about her books. 3 D.I. Erica Martin novels, the superb but harrowing Flower Girls that really made her name, and her current novel, The Cove.
Scots Care, for Scots in London in need of support, financial, practical or emotional help.
Hi Alice.
Hello.
Thank you for doing the Scots Care podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, you've got Scottish lineage on your father's side, but you're very much a Londoner because you grew up in Balham. Do you still think of yourself as a Londoner after all these years?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. London's my city. But my dad is a Mackay, so that's where the Scottish part of me comes in.
I was thinking about this because I was thinking growing up in Balham, and I was 28 when I moved to London, but you grew up in a city of 8 million people, and I kind of wonder if it shapes you as a person. You know, they say people that live in islands or people that live by the sea are different. And when I came to London, I found it quite terrifying because Glasgow's big, but it's not like London. You know, I found the crowds terrifying. I found the tube map terrifying. And what I appreciate about London now is this kind of multicultural boiling pot of people, which I love. But when I first got here, that terrified me. Whereas you grew up with that from day one and probably went to school amongst all that hustle and bustle.
Yeah, and I mean, I know all of them, all 8 million of them. They're all very, very good friends. No, well, I mean, I guess it's kind of, it's just what you're used to, isn't it? So, I mean, from the age of 11, I was making my way across London, jumping on tubes and buses, and I've now got an 11-year-old myself, and she seems incredibly young to me. So I do wonder about that sometimes. But I mean, it was just totally normal to me. And London, the whole city really became my stomping ground. And so I was just very used to the tube map and the bus routes and trains. And, I had my travel card and I was just kind of like running around town really. So I loved it. I loved the fact that of just having that freedom of kind of like, I mean, we didn't have mobile phones in those days, so I don't know what my mother was thinking really, but we'd just sort of leave the house and then I'd see her in the evening. After school we'd go off to the parks and go to McDonald's or whatever, and it was just great. It was really good fun.
I think it's changed so much, and just, I mean, I've got a 10-year-old, Rafe. You've got an 11-year-old. And I was talking to Rafe the other day, and I was saying to him, I used to go to school on my own. And he said, well, what age were you? And I said, well, I was younger than you. And he said, oh, did you live really near the school? And I said, no, I didn't. Did you have to cross any roads? I said, yeah, I crossed roads. And I was thinking, I'm a bit older than you, but I'm not ancient. And it did seem to be a different time. And when we went out, like you said, running about after school, I would say to my mum and dad, when I was about 10, what time do I have to be back? And they said, by the time the street lights come on. And that's how I knew I had to be back in the house. And whereas now, even Noah, who's going to be 14 this year, he's out and about today because his teachers are on strike. And it terrifies me, him running about on his own on bikes. I just get very scared for them.
No, I know. I mean, I remember walking down my road to go to catch the train to go to school, and there'd be like a flasher at the end of my road, and I mean that one kind of like happened quite a lot. I mean, and you just sort of like go, oh, there's the flasher, and on you'd go. You know,
Oh my Lord.
yeah. I mean, like you just sort of like, just got on with it, really. I don't remember being overly traumatized by it. I don't
There's
know. It was
there's
just a
the
sort of
difference.
different time. Yeah.
I don't think we had flashers in Glasgow when I was 10.
It's too cold. It's too cold up there, I think.
There was too much shrinkage. That's what it was. Nothing visible. Right, stop it. Stop. Now your mother's an actor, your father is a writer. I mean, did you feel
Yeah.
as if at that point you were growing up in a very creative household?
No, I mean, again, I think it's kind of just what you're used to, isn't it? I mean, I suppose I did in comparison with what my friends at school were doing. Like, I knew that my parents, well, they didn't have steady incomes, I suppose, was the sort of difference. So, I was very aware that when my mum got a job, she was acting, then she would often be going away for a period of time because she would be in a play, in rep somewhere. And so the money would kind of like come in kind of dribs and drabs. So it wasn't, and she wasn't going out to the office every day as my friends were. But no, I didn't sort of. It wasn't that I felt, we weren't sort of like prancing around the house quoting Shakespeare at each other. It was just sort of, it was just normal, really.
You said your dad's Mackay, your dad's Malcolm Mackay. Were you aware as you were growing up, were you aware that he was quite successful? Novels, radio, television, theatre. He's kind of done, the media gamut. Were you aware of his success as you were growing up, or was he hands-on, or was he more kind of locked in a study?
Yes, no, there was a time where he became really successful, where he got a lot of television work, and he was he was making stuff for TV, and it was all doing very well. And yeah, there was definitely a sort of period of great success for him. So that was very exciting, and he was sort of and I mean, he wrote a play called Airbase, which was first in the theatre, and then it was made as a BBC drama, and it was about American fighter pilots on a base in the UK. And I think Mary Whitehouse complained about it, and questions were asked in Parliament and stuff about it, and because he wrote this play about them all taking drugs and things to get to have the courage to fly these planes, and so that was all quite funny. Like, he went on BBC Breakfast and stuff, and it was all quite glamorous. He met Selena Scott. I seem to remember. Yeah. So that was all quite fun. But I don't think I ever thought at that point, that's something that I'm gonna get involved in. It was just sort of happening.
That's interesting, because kind of your next stage of your life and your career, you didn't. And reading about you, your story feels a bit like the circus kid who ran away from the circus to become an accountant, because you grew up in a house. You grew up in a house of artists and creators, and you became a lawyer. And I wondered if your mum and dad went, "Oh no, Alice, what are you doing with your life? Do something less secure."
Yeah, but no, I think there was that. I mean, it was always. I think the comparison was always that I was a bit like Safi with what's her name, Medina, in Absolutely Fabulous. And I lived with my mum. She brought me up on her own, and so she was a little bit like that kind of ab fab character. I mean, not as awful as Jennifer Saunders, obviously, but I was always quite straight, kind of making sure that everything was tidy and sorted, and like getting everything ready. And I think just sort of growing up, when I went to Durham University, and I did social sciences, I did politics, I did philosophy, anthropology. I always loved English. I mean, I always read loads. I mean, I loved going to the theatre and all that kind of stuff. But I think I was just really keen to get involved in kind of politics, really, and sort of NGO work. I think that was kind of where I think I'd seen, as I say, this kind of like sporadic income stream coming into our house. And I'd seen how sort of there was, that insecurity, really. And I think I'd wanted to not have that. I think I was quite keen to have like a steady job. And I didn't have that burning ambition to be on the stage, to be a performer. And so I wanted to get into something that was just going to be a bit more kind of secure, I think.
Secure, but heavyweight as well, because I was reading that when you became a human rights lawyer, one of your early cases was part of the team, the UN Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, prosecuting those responsible for Rwandan genocide. I mean, that must have been a phenomenal insight to pure evil at a very early stage of your career.
Yeah, well, I went out to Tanzania, to Arusha, to work, for the UN over there, just for a few months. I just started work for the UK government, actually, as a litigator, over here. And then I got a posting over there, as a separate thing. But I mean, I was like a little baby lawyer at that stage. So it wasn't like I was no Amal Clooney. But it was a fantastic experience. And it was, it was really, really interesting. And I mean, that was where my interest was these kind of, it was quite heavyweight. And I was really interested in the work that I was doing for the government. And I did this master's in human rights law. And that was where I was really, I loved it. I loved all of that work.
But it obviously made you want to go forward rather than seeing, as you said, as a baby lawyer, as a novice going in and thinking, this is horrible. This evil is awful. I don't want to be part of this. It wasn't emotionally overwhelming for you at that point.
No, in fact, I remember Fergal Keane, the journalist, going in when I was in Arusha. He was giving evidence at the tribunal, and he was very upset because he'd been there during the genocide, and he was he was having to testify, and he was like, really kind of psyching himself to go up. I found him in the corridor right before he was about to go in, and I just started fangirling over him, going like, "Oh, Fergal Keane, I think you're amazing. Like, can I just say how much I love your books?" And and he was just like, "Could you just go away, please? I'm trying to like." So no, I wasn't overwhelmed by it at all. I just found it all very interesting, and thought it was a great experience, really.
Did you always feel on the side of right? Did you always feel on the side of justice, or did you ever feel compromised? Or maybe the question is that I always find with writing and life, there's so much nuance, but the law tends to be rather black and white, doesn't it?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I was actually working for the judges, so I was sort of listening to both sides and was kind of, helping the judges kind of reach their decisions. I had friends of mine that were working on the defense team, and I think they had a very interesting time of it. But often what I was doing was transcribing witness statements. And I remember doing this job so well in my little office in Arusha, in these dusty African roads, and transcribing these like verbal testimonies that had been given. I remember thinking to myself then, gosh, it's so easy for me to just twist this in the way that I write them down because of the way that I heard it. I heard the way they had given the evidence. But the way that I write it, somebody reading it, I can make this seem one way or another. And I think at that, it was then it really struck me how important it is to, for me as the judge's assistant, was to be very neutral, but also there's the power of the written word, really.
If you're thinking about a job change, Scots Care can help. We offer grants for Scots in London retraining for a new career or study for the qualifications they need.
And at this point, you were still UK based, and it wasn't until, am I right in thinking, it wasn't until you moved to Singapore, you relocated to Singapore with your husband for a job change. And was it at this point you said, now, did you give up law, or were you still practicing law, or was it this point you said, this is when I could have a go at being a full-time writer?
So we moved. My husband got a secondment for 2 years, basically, to Singapore, just as I was pregnant with my youngest. And so I thought, great, go and have a baby there and have some maternity leave and just essentially take a bit of a career break. And then, so I ended up teaching law in Singapore at the university and doing a bit of kind of voluntary work at a local women's rights NGO over there. And then the 2 years passed and I was supposed to come back. We were all supposed to come back. And then it just ended up, my husband got taken on by another firm. And at this point, I had actually started writing just for my own enjoyment. And I'd started writing a novel just to see if I could. And that ended up, finding an agent, finding a publisher. And then that's just sort of how it came about. It wasn't really that I ever sat down and said, do you know what, I'm going to give up the law and I'm going to now become a career novelist. It was, it just sort of happened.
And when you did that, the thing that I wanted to ask you is when you sat down and you decided, I'm going to write a book, was it because of your law background that you thought, I'm going to write a crime fiction book? Or did you ever think I might write a chick lit book or I might write a sci-fi book? Or was there always one direction you were going in?
Yes, crime fiction, because I wanted to write something that I read, that I loved, and it was kind of like a challenge to myself that I wanted to see if I could do it, because I'd always read Agatha Christie or Patricia Cornwell or things like that, and so I thought to myself, how easy is it? How hard is it? Could I do it? And so I basically I was sitting on the tube, or the MRT as they call it in Singapore, and coming home from a concert actually one night, and I wrote the first paragraph of my first book, Bitter Fruits, and that first paragraph has always stayed the same, and it just kind of went on from there.
So your first three books, Bitter Fruits, To Die For, and The Taken, all have the same lead character, D.I. Erica Martin. Right.
Yes.
Now, I wondered about this because do you think it's harder to write a female lead than it is to write a male lead? And my thoughts were, because a male lead, like especially in crime fiction, when you think of somebody like Rebus, they can be more downtrodden, they can be more depressed, they can be more alcoholic. And I wonder if that just wouldn't be tolerated in a female lead character.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Martin, my character, is pretty grumpy. She's not an alcoholic, although she does like a whiskey. It never occurred to me to write a man, to be honest with you. Although I did deliberately call her D.I. Martin, which I got into lots of trouble about. People had very strong opinions about that.
Well, because I wanted
because the man's name, I wanted her to have. I wanted it to be sort of gender neutral name. I didn't really want you to know whether she was a man or a woman. I didn't see that it was important.
Yeah. Do you think crime fiction is still too dominated by men, or do you I read a lot online about trying to get more parity for female crime fiction readers?
Look, I think if you're writing a book, you've just got to have an affinity with your character. And I mean, I just know as a writer, you will just start writing somebody, and they'll, you can't help who they turn out to be.
I think after those three books, you wrote a book called The Flower Girls, which was, I don't know what the phrase would be. I'm not going to say it's a step up, because it wasn't, it wasn't better than your other books, or your other books weren't as good as this, but it was a different take because it dealt with the murder of a child. So it was certainly a lot more emotionally hard hitting. And I kind of wondered, what was this something that you were drawn to? Did you think this was just a fascinating subject? Because a lot of it's about culpability, about can a child be held responsible for killing another child? So I wondered where was the kernel of that idea for you?
Well, it really went back to my kind of school days when I was stomping around London, when I must have been about 15 and sort of mid-90s, and it was the murder of Jamie Bulger, and his murderers, Robert Thompson and John Venables, and I was a teenager when that happened, and as with most of the country who will remember it. I was deeply shocked by it, and it had always stayed with me. And then when I got into law, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I was a judicial review lawyer, and judicial review is where judges basically review decisions of public law bodies. So, and one of those are the parole board. And so somebody like Thompson and Venables, when they came up for parole, that they would have been given, that can be reviewed by a judge if it's appealed. Anyway, I got really interested in the fact that these boys were considered at 10 years old. They were tried as adults for Jamie Bulger's murder, and that they were released when they were 18. And and I didn't want to talk about that crime in particular, but it just really struck me that when do we decide, one, that a child can be tried as an adult, and two, when do you ever kind of like, when can you ever be forgiven for that? Like, when have you served your time? Can you ever be, or is it never enough? Do you have to be locked up forever for something as kind of abhorrent as that crime was? So it wasn't that I wanted to really come down on the side of any of those arguments, but I wanted to just I just found them really interesting as debates, and I just wanted to kind of write about them. So so that was those were the things that I found interesting. And so I created a novel that kind of dealt with those issues.
It's interesting you talk about forgiveness there, because I think there's probably forgiveness on two levels. There's forgiveness in the eyes of the law, if it is forgiveness, or you served your time, but there's also forgiveness in the eyes of society, and probably society would never forgive for the crime of killing a child, especially nowadays where things tend to get hyped up a lot more through social media.
Exactly. And so the characters that I have in the book, I do have a family member, and I do have, I have everybody across the board, like all of those points of view are represented. So then it's kind of the reader's just going to see what they think about it, really.
Is that, when you write something like this, is it difficult for you as a mum of two girls to emotionally detach from it at the end of the day? And when you shut the laptop lid and you're going to make the tea for them, does it linger with you?
No, I think I'm quite good at kind of compartmentalizing these things. Ultimately I'm writing fiction, and I'm not writing about my children. And no, I'm quite good at kind of putting that to one side. And I am telling a story, and it is ultimately a story. So it is, when you learn the craft of writing a novel, you do about the mechanics of it as well. So it's not, I'm not fooling myself.
No.
Like I know what I'm doing. So it's kind of, no, I can do that.
Did you know Scots Care can help second and even third generation Scots break the cycle of deprivation? Key services include financial grants, mental health support, social events for the Scots community, and more.
Flower Girls was a big success for you. There's loads of advertising around it. It was translated into multiple languages. The audiobook was read by Emilia Fox, the actress in Silent Witness. And
Yeah.
I was wondering if, even though at this point this was your fourth book, did you have a I've arrived moment? Did you feel as if, okay, this is a career step up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, it was very exciting, all of that. And seeing posters on the tube, and there was a big thing in Waterloo Station, and it was really good fun. But also I think I felt like, I knew what I was doing a bit more, as a writer, which is good in itself. I think you feel like you kind of, you maybe lose that imposter syndrome a little bit, and you feel a bit more kind of valid or validated.
Well, do you have any self-doubt now as a writer, or when you're writing, do you think, oh, that's good?
Oh, no, don't ever think that. You don't. You think that's rubbish most of the time.
Well, do you know what I was wondering? I was wondering how somebody who, like you now, 5 books in, what is your edit process like when you're working with your publisher? Are they hard on you? Do they? I read an interview with you where you were talking about in the early books that you would lose whole storylines to editors and they would take stuff out. I mean, is that difficult not to take that personally? Because that's probably weeks or months of your life.
Yeah, but you can't take it personally. I mean, like, you're all working to the same end, which is to make the book better. So, I mean, unless you really, really disagree with something, you have to kind of, sort of take a view on it. I mean, my hardest editor has always been my agent, who I love very dearly, Ariella, but she is she's harsh.
She'll tell you
But
what something works or something doesn't work.
yes, yes, yes. And
And
then she'll say in a very lovely tone of voice, she'll go, but I think we've really taken a step back here.
oh, really?
Yeah, then I have to go and have a large glass of wine and then remind myself that, she is just doing it for the good of me.
I've spoken to a couple of writers, Christopher Brookmeyer and Amy McCulloch, and it was somebody like that who said to me, they no longer read their own reviews because they just don't want to know. Do you read your reviews?
Yeah,
And
I don't mind.
if somebody says this is not so good or I didn't enjoy that, are you okay with that? You can, to use your word, compartmentalize that one?
Yes. I mean, there's no accounting for taste, is there?
No, I suppose. Are you disciplined? Do you sit down every day and you go, I'm going to do X amount of words? I certainly lost my discipline. I mean, I used to work at ITN years ago, and I used to work hard, really hard. I would write loads of interviews a day, and and then go to the pub and then come back in and write loads more interviews. And nowadays I find it hard to do 6 or 7 questions for an interview before I go, I'll just empty the dishwasher or have a cup of tea. Are you able to
I
sit
know.
there and do it?
I am. I know what you mean, though. There's, I do get quite persuaded by, watching Happy Valley reruns or whatever. So it is, I am, but I have to be, because if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. So
Well, it's quite an isolated existence. You said
very
something.
isolated.
You said Christmas parties are a bit lonely when you're a writer, because it's basically like you in your own kitchen with a glass of wine.
Yeah, and the Spotify playlist that I've made myself. That's it.
Yeah.
I know. But I mean, the editing process for me, like at the moment I'm doing edit of a first draft. The first draft I find is the best bit, because that's just like, if I could get 1,000 words done a day, then I'm happy, and I'm just making stuff up, and it doesn't even necessarily have to make that much sense.
So as a first draft for you, what kind of percentage finished of the final book would you say your first draft is? Do you just get through to 100,000 words and then start to refine the product?
100,000, you're lucky. Be more like 70,000, and then but then I'd do another draft myself of that, which wouldn't take too long, and then I would send it to either editor or agent, depending on what's going on, and then I'd get to where I am now, which is a really substantive edit, based on their notes, which will be quite heavy weather.
Yeah, that's the bit that I think must be difficult, because you're going back over it and going back over it. That's the point you really have to knuckle down, I suppose, to get to your final product.
Yeah, and you have to cut a lot,
Let's talk about The Cove, which is the book that you have out at the moment. And this is set on a tropical island, and 2 families who don't really know each other all that well decide to go on holiday together. Have you ever done that? I can't imagine doing that, because I'm not very social at the best of times. And when I go on holiday, that's why I go on holiday, because I'm so burned out that I want to sit behind a newspaper and nobody to speak to me. So I can't imagine going on holiday with another family. That would kill me.
Well, this stems from living in Singapore for 10 years, as I did. And when you've got young children, going on holiday with another family who also have young children is quite a good thing to do, because there's safety in numbers. And the kids can kind of entertain each other, which leaves you a bit of time to lie on a sunbed and drink gin tonic. So yeah, we did do that quite a lot. I mean, it's not that you don't know this other family at all. It's just that you perhaps, you've not been on holiday with them, and you perhaps don't know everything about them. And that's very typical of expat life, that you kind of present this sort of facade to the world, but you've never been to their home back in the UK. Like, you don't know really where they've come from. So yeah, that's quite a familiar scenario.
I like the setting because it was a tropical island setting. I think, would you ever write anything, or would you ever start a story with the idea that it has to be more than a book? Like, does it always just exist on the page for you, or would you ever think, oh, do you know what? I'd like to sell this as a screenplay, or I'd like to sell this as a film or a TV series, so therefore I'm going to set it here. Do you ever think like that, or
I mean, I would love to sell any of my books as a film or screenplay or television series, if anyone would like to take them up as that. But no, I can't say I'm that sort of like devious about it, and that I think, oh, this will make no. But
yeah, this is all going to be set on an oil rig, and there's a killer on the loose.
Yeah.
You can have that one if you want.
Thank you.
It's strange you watched. You said reruns of Happy Valley. I think Happy Valley's great. I think Sarah
it's brilliant, isn't it? So good.
The writing is super tight, and I think the acting
so good
is great. Do you like watching that kind of stuff, or is it too much of a busman's holiday?
No, I love it. And in fact, Sally Wainwright wrote a fantastic police series. I don't know if you've seen, called Scott and Bailey.
Yes.
Have you seen that? It's so good.
Two female leads, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I never realized that was the same person.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the new book, the one that you're editing now? Can you give us a general idea of what that's going to be about?
This one actually has got a good tagline. If anyone wants to make a film of it, it's called. It's not called. It's sort of Downton Abbey meets Succession.
Oh, so is it set in the past? Is it a historical?
Oh no, it's not. What that means is it's just like in sort of like British country house, but it's kind of like really rich, and then there's lots of murders that take place in it.
I like this.
And it's all to do with money.
When will this be out? When have you got to deliver this? Are you under pressure to deliver this now?
No, I'm just not really. The paperback of the Cove comes out in April, and so I'll be hoping to get it done before then.
And how long does it take from that kind of delivery of you hope to get it done to that when the hardback of Downtown and Succession comes out?
Well, it's kind of really depends on marketing calendars and who else has got books coming out and things like that. So I don't know, it's quite hard to predict, really.
So the paperback of the Cove is out in April. Alice, thank you for joining me on the Scots Care podcast. It's been lovely to talk books and flashers and growing up.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcus. It's been really fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Scots Care, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.